Hello, my name is Savannah Hobbie, and today for my chemistry class at Brookdale Community College, I will be presenting on the Flint water crisis in Flint, Michigan. To my left, you will see a picture of Flint, Michigan, and that's the city. And also to my left, you will see 4 water bottles that were filled from the tap water of people's homes in Flint, Michigan. As a little bit of a background, Flint, Michigan is the 7th largest city in Michigan with over 100,000 people in its population. In April of 2014, in order to reduce some budgeting in the water sources, they switched to water sources. As a result, they didn't treat the water correctly. It was very insufficient, and because of that, high corrosion took place for the pipes that were going into people's waters, which led to high lead exposure. As a result, people had rashes, hair loss, were complaining immediately of the smell and the color of the water. Didn't seem right. People didn't feel okay with it. And that is when, I believe it was September, that they went to a town hall sort of meeting and complained. They're like, this is not okay. Something is wrong with our water source. And they switched it back. But 100,000 people were contaminated. And it took until January of 2016 for a state of emergency to be declared. People were told not to use any other source of water except for bottled for bathing, drinking, cooking, etc. And that was almost 2 years after the fact of the water being led into their water pipes. On my left, you can see a little boy from Flint, Michigan that had a skin rash that was said to be from the high lead exposure that was in their water systems. So, lead. Many people immediately thought there was a problem with the water, but officials were like, no, it's fine, it's all good, it's okay. But after many studies were conducted, there were proved to be high amounts of lead, and that is when the people of Flint, Michigan were enraged, and the officials were like, oh gosh, we gotta switch this quick. Lawsuit upon lawsuit was happening. Because I looked up what happens with lead contamination, and it is a lot. There are a lot of things that could happen to an average person. Anemia, weakness, damage to your liver or brain, and even death. And actually 12 people, as far as I know, that was reported, passed away from the complications from the high lead exposure. And not to mention, the chloride to sulfate mass ratio for their original water source was in Detroit. It was 0.45, which is a normal level of corrosion, I'd assume. And then for the Flint water, it was 1.6, which is a very, very high level of corrosion that took place. And that shows that the lead was going after the Flint water systems very quickly, very rapidly, and it was as clear as day that there was a problem in the water system. And they tried to fix it. They tried to add ferric chloride to improve the removal of the lead, but there was already so much chloride from the original concentration that it made the water more corrosive, and corrosive means breaking down. So the water kept, when they added the ferric chloride, it actually aided in the helping of the corrosion of the lead into the pipes, or from the pipes and into people's homes. And that is something that's so unfortunate, because they're like, oh, quick fix, we got it, we can do this, but it didn't work. And my graph over here to my left that I found from an article told me that orthophosphates could be added to the water to fix or to reduce the amount of lead, but for some reason Flint didn't do this in their approval system. And I could only wonder what could have happened if they did fix that. As you can see at the bottom left, when they add the phosphates, it's clear as day, but without the phosphates, you see all the contaminants. Furthermore, there are 3 main ways to remove lead, but only one of the 3 is actually beneficial and efficient. So the first way is distillation, and that's not the most optimal solution. It's very slow, it takes a lot of energy, and when you have 100,000 people with contaminated water, it is not the prime way to help reduce the lead that is in their water, and it's just not efficient at all and not worth the time or energy or heat that is going into the removal process. I feel like that would cause a whole nother issue for Flint, especially with the amount of people that were affected. Number 2 would be carbon filtration. And it's a very interesting process, carbon filtration, but the thing about the carbon filtration is it's not reliable. So it could say it could clean 10,000 gallons of water, but it could stop working at 2,000 gallons of water and we wouldn't know. So, 2001 gallon comes around and you're drinking, you're like, oh, this is great, but it still has lead in it and you would have no way of telling, but you'd be drinking contaminated water and could be suffering from the effects that I talked about previously, which are anemia, weakness, death, brain and kidney failure. And if you have young children, it was liver failure. If you have young children, that's even more of a risk because they are still developing their organs and their brains, and that is going to affect them greatly. Now, the third and best way to remove lead from water is called reverse osmosis. And that's basically something that we could compare to like the Brita filter, where you just pour the water in from the tap and then it goes through a little filtration process and then it comes out in the bottom and it's clear of all of the contaminants that were in the previous tap water. So, as I mentioned over here, it is the water's pushed through numerous filters. The reverse filters out the lead and other contaminants. And you could see the process right here in the picture. There's all the contaminants, all the poisons, etc. It goes through the filters, and then at the bottom you have the lower contaminant concentration, which is due to the reverse osmosis. And this is a very low cost, no energy needed, not very expensive, as I mentioned before, and it's a great, effective way to remove lead from the water. And what Flint did was they just kept telling people to run their faucets and don't go days without running them, just trying to clear them out after they already switched back to their original water source. And that's what they told people to do, while also sending out officials to check over 20,000 pipes, where 8,000 pipes were actually removed and replaced. So, pH levels. We discussed this in my chemistry class, and I thought it'd be important to mention that people were very enraged when they were developing alopecia and skin rashes and skin diseases, and they blamed the lead levels for that. And actually, it came about, supposedly, doctors and officials were saying, no, the skin rashes, the alopecia, it's all because of the imbalance of the pH levels. So ideally, you want a pH level of 4 to 6 for your skin and for your hair and such. But if you have 3 or below level of skin and hair, or 8 and above, that's highly irritating to your skin and to your hair, and that will cause an irritable reaction like alopecia or a skin rash. And people were enraged by this call to action, I guess, is what people were saying. That's what they were claiming. It was from the pH levels, not from the lead. People were saying, you can't tell me this because you don't know. It's just a kind of prediction. But actually 122 people with skin rashes and alopecia were being tested by 4 dermatologists, and the dermatologists came back and said none of their reactions were from bacteria or viruses, which would be from the lead. But it is still unclear as to say whether or not the lead was the cause or if the pH levels were the cause. I remember I read a story about a grandmother who said her 7-year-old daughter had alopecia, and she was very angry at this discovery of the pH levels because she was saying, how are you going to tell me that it's from the pH levels when you didn't even know that this was happening months prior? Like, you don't know what you're talking about. Like, I don't trust you. And to be frank, I agree with her because, that's her little granddaughter, and she's suffering at 7 years old, and the doctors and the officials didn't know that the lead was happening in the first place. Who are they to say it's the pH levels? So it's not a confirmed thing, but it does make a lot of sense for it to be that. But in the case of Flint, it was just a crazy situation that took place that you never could know if it was from the lead, if from pH, something else, but it wasn't from bacteria or viruses, the 122 cases that they did study. Moreover, as I've mentioned before, there were 12 deaths that took place as a result of the complications of the Flint water crisis, which was awful. Also, there were 87 that were very ill. Obviously, many people are affected, but it was reported that 87 people were very ill from this. But I think the thing about the Flint water crisis is we may never know the true amount that were damaged from this, and they may not even know to this day that they have internal damage or brain damage from this event. What I do know is that in between 6,000 to 12,000 children were affected by the highly contaminated lead water. And as a result, that affects them the most because they are the ones with the developing bodies, the developing organs and brains, and the lead going into their system, the high amount of lead going into their system can give them brain damage, ADHD, make them, have mental disorders. That's also been a research that came about because, you know, they're still developing, and when they get a chemical that's too much, it affects their brains differently and more powerfully since they are developing still. And that's the scary thing, is that's why it's between 6 and 12,000, because they really won't know. It could be higher than that number. It's definitely not lower, because we know at least 6,000 were affected. But there are even headlines and tweets made about the children of Flint, and one said, excuse me, third grade reading proficiency has plunged in the lead poisoned city, setting off the debate about the possible causes. And then the tweet to follow that was, I've lived near in Flint most of my life. Flint third graders reading proficiency drops nearly 3/4 in 1 year. And personally, I do not think that is a coincidence, and many people do not think that is a coincidence. They blame the water for this issue because the water can affect their brains, especially when they've been drinking it for so long and had no idea. As I've mentioned before, lead contamination in your brain can cause, in your body can cause brain damage and liver and kidney damage. It's overall damage to your internal system, and that could be very well why these reading proficiencies are dropping and why people are just not doing the best with their education in Flint, Michigan. Currently, people are still hesitant to drink the water in Flint, Michigan, even though officials claim that it is safe. You know, they don't believe them, they don't trust them, they're scared of bacteria, they don't know, they can't see it, so they don't know anymore. But many people are still living on bottled water donations, and that's why it's so important to keep talking about this issue, because people are still relying for their everyday lives on bottled water. They need to shower, bathe, cook, etc. with bottled water because they don't want to reap the negatives of what if it's not okay. Unfortunately, it is said that Flint, Michigan has better water systems now than other cities in Michigan currently, and that's scary, one, because no one is talking about the other cities, but two, that as bad as Flint was, that it's still better than other cities in Michigan, which I found very interesting and very scary that it's happening in our own country. It's a very much so crazy issue for our country to have when we have such technological developments, but no one's talking about it, and there's only so much people can do when not a lot of people are talking or caring about it anymore, which is very unfortunate. Thankfully, 15 officials, state and local, have been charged for this whole crisis and are currently being booked and in court, etc. for all of these issues. It doesn't solve the problem at hand, but it definitely gives a little bit of a relief to some people, knowing that people are being held accountable, but it doesn't fix the issues that cannot be taken away, which is very sad. Now I wanted to give a little shout out and celebrity spotlight to a celebrity that's around my age, in his 20s, and he's Will Smith's son, you know, the Fresh Prince of Bel-Air, and his name's Jaden Smith. So Jaden Smith actually started his own water company called Just Water. It's made with sustainable products for the packaging, and he actually donates tons and tons and tons of his own water to Flint, Michigan, and he has Just Water trucks show up, and people can just take as much as they need. And I thought that was very cool. Not to mention, he also installed water filtration services in Flint, Michigan that is completely free. It would clean 10 gallons in 60 seconds for a family, and it's available to the public of Flint, Michigan, and as I said before, it's completely free. And I thought that was a very great thing for him to do, because he's just a kid. He doesn't have to care about this, but he took his celebrity status, his money, and he turned it into something good where he can help people. He said a quote that I really liked from a Teen Vogue article, and it said, "The conversation about Flint has faded from the public consciousness, and that is a problem." And I think that's from a late 2019 interview, and I think that's so important, because articles I found were usually from the 2014, 2015, 2016, some in January of 2019, but he's taking the time in literally present day 2019 to talk about this issue, to use his voice to go after and to go help those in Flint, Michigan, and kind of call people out, talk about this issue. This is happening in your country and no one's talking about it anymore. I thought that was very cool. And I just wanted to add at the end for ways to help in case anybody was interested that stumbles across this video, or my professor. You could donate to those bringing water to Flint. That's one way to help. There's money, things online like GoFundMes. and stuff like that. And I think you could just help by, there's certain organizations that were created specifically for Flint if you wanted to help them. And you can also support researchers like the Flint water supply. That's a study that's done by Virginia Tech University, and they're really helping out Flint and bringing attention and research to the city. You could also call Governor Snyder to help the residents. He's what people blame. He's who people blame over to my left. And also you could just talk about it, tweet about it, use your voice to help this city because they're suffering and that state is suffering clearly, as we could see from earlier discussions. So yeah, that is my discussion on the Flint water crisis. I hope you enjoyed. Thank you.